beyond what we had in 1969 just hasn't existed, and lo and behold, it hasn't happened. But that's not likely to happen when it comes to keeping people from getting the diseases of old age. So this is pretty good news. This says that, yes, we have to be very speculative about how soon it's going to be before we get to longevity escape velocity, before we get this robust human rejuvenation. But what we can be very, very sure of, because, of course, this is just an illustration. You can see the same thing in any other technology you care to mention, whether it's computers, whether it's combating of infectious diseases, you name it. What we can say with great confidence is that once we get to longevity escape velocity, we are very, very, very likely to continue to maintain it as long as we like. So that's pretty good news. Now, if you think that's a little bit too hand-wavy because it's just appealing to other technologies, fair enough. We, a few years ago, addressed that problem by doing a computer simulation. We wanted to know, this, right? We wanted to know, you know, what can we actually expect given what we know about how aging works? So here's my old definition of aging that I mentioned earlier. We created a computer simulation of exactly that. It's all published. I can send everyone copies of the papers if you're really interested, but this is the basic result. These are survival curves. So a survival curve is simply a graph of what proportion of a cohort, a group of people that were born in the same year, are still alive at a given age. So the black line here on the left, this one here, is a regular normal survival curve of actual people. I think it was Americans who were born in 1900 or something like that. And as you can see, it's just what you'd expect. Everyone's alive at age 0, obviously, by definition. They're almost all alive until age 50 or so. Then they start dropping like flies, and hardly any of them make it past 100. So the blue line here, the dark blue line, which is close to the black line, is the survival curve from our simulation that looks at people who have the same inherent risk of death that they have, that the black line had, but they get these therapies starting from the age of 80. 80, all right? Now that's why the two lines are on top of each other until here, because obviously half the people are dead by 80. That's the average life expectancy of such people, more or less. After that, they get a bit of benefit, but only a little bit. And this brings me back to what I said earlier. I do not work on longevity. I work on keeping people healthy. The only difference between this work I'm telling you about today and the work that the whole of the rest of the medical profession does is that I think we are in striking distance of being able to keep people so healthy that they maintain, however long they live, the risk of death each year that you guys have, that young adults have. Okay, they're just as likely to wake up at the age of 90, just as healthy and say, damn, still alive, as they are at the age of 30. So this is all about health. And the reason that these people do not get much benefit is because they're already in a bad way before the therapies begin, and it just takes too long to rescue them. Each year that goes by, they're still fairly frail. They have a good chance of dying. Therefore, there's not many of them getting more than about 10 or 15 years more than they otherwise would have got. But now let's look at the next line, this grey-blue line here. That is a simulated cohort of people who start getting these therapies just 10 years earlier, at the age of 70, all right? And these people also get only a small amount of benefit at first, but the benefit builds up and builds up. Their biological age genuinely starts to go down, and of course that means that their risk of mortality and morbidity also starts to go down. So these people eventually, maybe 15% of them get out to the age of 150, by which time they're pretty damn biologically young, and by the time they got a bit further, their risk of death from aging has become basically zero. These graphs don't show anything about risk of death from being hit by trucks and stuff. So that's pretty interesting. And you can see the next line here, this brown line, is when people are 60 when the therapies are initiated, and nearly half of them get to that point. So all of this is pretty damned obviously, unequivocally longevity escape velocity, as I've just shown you, as I've just defined it. But that's not all. The really big thing I want you to pay attention to on this slide is up here. In this particular run of the simulation, we were just ludicrously, insanely over-pessimistic about the rate of progress. So 42 years, I'm saying the therapy's doubling in their ability to knock off damage in every 42 years. What's 42 years? That's the distance between Lindbergh and Concorde. Now, how fucking crazy is that? That is so obviously over-pessimistic, it's just not true. So what we're looking at here is something that is so certain to happen, however counterintuitive you may think it is, that we've absolutely got to accept that it very probably will happen. And it's utterly irresponsible to say, oh, we'll get people to live to 150, but that's all, or something like that, which a lot of my less thoughtful colleagues do tend to say. So this is what it actually means in terms of longevity. Okay, as I said, I don't work on longevity. I work on health. Longevity is a side benefit. I think it's a very good thing that people will live a lot longer, but it's a side benefit. This is what it means. The oldest person in the world so far, ever, is a woman named Jeanne Calment, who died in 1997 in the south of France. She was absolutely wonderful. She was the oldest person in the world for almost 10 years. People would come round to her house every time she had a birthday, obviously, and they'd interview her. There would be all manner of press every time, and they would always ask the same fucking question. What's your secret? It was so boring. It's even more boring than the questions I get. And yet, she took it in good heart. She always came up with a new answer to the question. My favourite one was when she was 120. She said, my secret is I gave up smoking when I was 117. It's not even true. She gave it up for 6 months, and then she thought, this is no fun, I'll take it up again. But anyway, so she was 122 when she died. So we won't get people living to 150 until we get these therapies that give us robust human rejuvenation, okay? This is going to give us 30 or so years. But then, because of what I've just told you about longevity escape velocity, we will have done the hard part. So that means that people who are only a little bit younger will be, in large numbers, able to escape death from anything to do with aging and illness from aging for as long as they live. And that gives us numbers like this. This number is not just plucked out of the air. This number, 1,000 years, is the, roughly speaking, the average age that people would live to today in the industrialized world if they maintained throughout their lives the same risk of death each year that young adults have today. Okay, the same risks from causes not related to aging. So this is not a crazy number. So I'm going to end in the next just 2 minutes by saying, what can you do to make a difference? Well, I have alluded to one or two of the things already. In the very long term, it means things like this, but it's going to be a good 900 years before we have any 1,000-year-olds. Hello. Okay, so it's not something that we need to worry about yet. Whereas, there are one or two other things that we might need to worry about. This change in the demographic of the population will undoubtedly have quite an impact on society. And lots of people come to me and they talk about overpopulation and dictators living forever and wouldn't it be really boring and how we pay the pensions and so on. But actually, there's a little bit of a shorter-term implication of all of this. If you don't want to get any of these diseases, hands up anyone who wants to get any of these diseases. That was easy. Okay, so, if you don't want these diseases, then you probably want these therapies because this is the only way that we're going to stop them from happening. As I said, it is biologically nonsensical to think of the diseases of old age as in any way separable from aging itself. The diseases of old age are diseases of old age for one reason only, namely, they are aspects of the later stages of aging. All of the stuff I've been telling you about today can be described in 2 words, preventative geriatrics. It's all about stopping people from getting sick in the first place. And this is the way that we're going to do it. So, when you hear this sort of thing being said, that I'm talking about immortality, I have a funny feeling that the word immortality appears in the description of this talk on the outside of this tent, then you've got to remember that immortality is a word that means something else. It means God-given zero risk of death from any cause, which is indeed not something that technology is likely to be able to deliver anytime soon. But longevity escape velocity, even though it may sound a little bit like immortality when you don't pay much attention, is not actually immortality. It is the indefinite postponement of age-related ill health. And that's what these strategies for what I call engineered negligible senescence seem likely to deliver. So the conclusion here is not true. Unfortunately, some people feel that I'm a bit of a threat, and they have said things like this to the press. One of my so-called friends, Richard Farragher, who's a professor in Sussex, actually once introduced me for a talk that I was giving in this way. He said, Aubrey represents the paramilitary wing of gerontology. I thought it was quite funny, but the fact is, these are the irresponsible people. Resistance to all of this, resistance to new ideas about how to combat aging really well, is delaying progress. It is slowing things down, it is diminishing the amount of resources that are being allocated to these things, and it's costing lives in the long run. So if you want to know more about this, here's the book I mentioned earlier. It came out a couple of years ago. Get the paperback edition. Tell you why. It came out 1 year later. And in those 12 months, so much progress was made in the development of these therapies that we had to write a whole new chapter just to cover that 1 year of progress. So that's worth doing. We have a website, obviously. You can always email us. We're a foundation. We're a non-profit. That means we don't have any money. That means that if there are any billionaires in the audience, please see me later. But it also means that if you feel enthused and inspired to contribute in any way to this, with your expertise, your time, anything like that, have me along to give a talk at your festival. If you happen to run a radio station, have me along to do an interview or whatever. But also, of course, many other things. We can use more or less all types of skill. And one big thing that absolutely everyone in this room can do is as follows. Advocacy. You can all talk about this. If you actually get what I'm saying, if you understand that aging is quite a bad thing,